Melissa, thank you so much for joining us today on the podcast. I can't wait to dive in to all of the things that you're doing and some of the fun things that you have coming up. So, welcome.
Thank you so much, Angela. I am delighted to be here and super, super honored.
Yeah, absolutely. There's something that's magical that happens when mom entrepreneurs and mom podcasters come together. It's like those two superpowers that I think are so special make for like really interesting conversations. So, let's just dive right in and talk about your book, Fertile Imagination, because I'm really interested in this concept that moms have an imagination that is our superpower. So tell us about that.
I'm excited to report that despite the fact that we barely sleep, something has been sleeping inside of moms around the world, and it is our imagination, specifically our fertile imagination. And that has the ability to actually cast a vision that it's never seen before in terms of from the moms, that you surround yourself by, right? So like let's imagine that you wanted to start an online business or you wanted to open up a gallery and you have never in your life seen another mom do the same thing. Well, if your fertile imagination were awake, then it would give you the inspiration, the energy, the resources, the ideas necessary to execute on that beautiful, beautiful dream. And that was something that was so important to me, this ability to imagine something for myself, that when I did become a mom, I have three little boys, I felt like I lost that ability. And surprise, surprise, no, I wasn't sleeping very much. Not the first time around when I had my firstborn.
Me neither.
I know, right? And certainly not the second time around when I had my identical twins. And that is why I felt, kind of like empty, a little hollow. It was kind of like,
Mhm.
okay, wow, is this what my life is going to look like for the rest of my life? Like looking outside these beautiful windows at the time and just seeing the sun rise and set over and over and again, right? It was a little bit like Groundhog's Day. And I didn't feel inspired to almost like start thinking about what I wanted for myself, whether it was as a business owner. I launched my business in 2011 with my firstborn on my chest in my ergo baby. But then at the same time, now as a mom of three, it's kind of like, okay, now what? What am I going to do with, this business that I've established? And also, what am I going to do in terms of making it all work? Because now the variables were very, very different. And I needed like almost like a jetpack, to fuel me into my next chapter. And
Mhm.
that's why I wrote the book, because I wanted to find my path back to having a fertile imagination. I wanted to see, like, okay, wait a minute, do I still have it inside of me to lift myself up and really cast a vision that would excite me, that would thrill me, that would get me, like, jumping out of bed as if I was going to great adventure, by the way?
Mhm.
Do I still have that ability in me? And
Mhm.
so when I discovered the fact that I could get it back, that's when I started to write this book, Fertile Imagination. And in the book, I actually lay out 3 steps that anyone can take to find their way back to their superpower, that of having a fertile imagination.
I love that. So, was there a moment where you were like, hey, wait a minute? I remember I used to think and feel differently about what was possible for me. So, what was that moment or like that phase like?
Well, for me, I would say, it's so interesting because I'm gonna say that I kind of divide my life in different ways, right? So I look at it like pre-Melissa, pre-mom or whatever, right? So before I became a mom, that was one version of me. And it was easy for me to like lay my head down on my pillow and on my way to sleep, start, having these visions of magnificent lifestyles, right? Living in London, all these things before becoming a mom. Then the first time around, when I became a mom and had my firstborn, for me, that moment then was very simple. I was about 6 months into being a stay-at-home mom. And
Mhm.
I hadn't planned that. My childcare solution, which I thought was perfect at the time, totally fell apart before I actually had my firstborn. And then I decided to opt out of, living or having an advertising agency career to become a mom. And when I spent those 6 months by myself with my child, I didn't know what to do with him during the day. And so I was a little desperate. I was just like, I would call my mom and be like, Mom, what do you do with the baby? But then on top of that, I was surrounded by moms that had really settled into that identity of a stay-at-home mom. And I remember looking at, like, I think it was like celebrity news in someone's living room, and it was surrounded by all these other moms, and they were talking about people on TV, and they were like, oh, look at that person, blah, blah, blah. And I had that moment. I was like, there's no way on this green earth that I'm going to live my life watching someone on TV live out their dreams. Like, A, that's fake. And B, this life, my life is as precious and as amazing as anyone. And so that moment was what got me to actually open up my LLC of my business,
Mhm.
right? That was like the first step there. Then when I had the twins, I would say then the next moment that was like this realization for me was, I remember I was talking to someone who worked in a corporate setting. I mean, someone that I would say is a corporate Olympian, right? She's like
Mhm.
president of an organization right now in a male dominated field. She's like
Mhm.
amazing. And I remember having a conversation with her while I was trying to nurse my twins. And I told her, I said, I really want to get back to building my business. And I told her, I also want to get back to getting my body back as well, right? So I'm telling her all these things I wanted to do, while any person that would look at me would also tell me, Melissa, why don't you like at least focus on getting some sleep? Like, why don't you maybe focus on not walking into glass doors, as I was literally doing? But when I was having the conversation with that person, she was trying to tell me to, be more mindful of my self-care and to not, have such high expectations. And it's okay if I didn't fulfill a goal that I had as a mom, for me personally, in terms of nursing my kids, and to let the business kind of, wait until the right time. And when I was having that conversation with her, I thought to myself, I was like, that's not me. I actually need my business to feel alive. Like, I actually need my business so that I have something going on that makes me feel like I'm using the skills and all the talents that I've honed through the decades. And so that was another moment that I was just like, I've got to figure this out because this is not working for me. And that was a really tough year in spite of the nursing journey, because my stepmother passed away that year.
Mhm.
This was year one of having my identical twins. And I mean, I went as far as nursing my twins at the funeral home director's office. Like, this is how intense it was.
Mhm.
But that year for me was just kind of like that moment that, okay, I want this so much that I want this despite of what else life has to throw at me. And I knew I needed to find my way back to feeling totally plugged into something that was like at least cool, for lack of a better word,
Mhm.
as far as a business owner.
That story is uh, it's really incredible, and I think it's so brave of anybody, and I think it's a hallmark of any entrepreneur, honestly, is to not just accept your situation and how things are, and not listening to others when, seemingly what they're saying is making sense, but in your gut, you're going, mm-mm. And then you listen to that and you still kept taking action on your own behalf despite, you could have been comfortable and done, the easy thing, but no, you kept persevering what you knew you needed to do. And that is, I hope anybody listening just takes that as permission, whatever is calling you, to just pursue that despite what society is saying, despite what your in-laws are saying or your family or friends or whatever. If you're called to start your business and do more, by all means do that.
Absolutely. And I second that, Angela. Like, yeah, if you're listening, if what Angela just said was like, oh my God, she's like reading my mind. I do want to do something that sounds wild to other people.
Yeah.
100%. That year was also very tough because that year, and I write about this in the book, my mom she was toxic with psych meds. She has a mental illness, manic depression. And that year, not only did my stepmother pass away, but on top of that, my mom was in a psych unit and we didn't know if she would get out for 365 days while I was a new mom of three. And the only one with twins in my family and in the history of our families on both sides. So,
Wow.
when you want something, even if to the outside world it seems outrageous or not
Mhm.
necessary or a
Mhm.
bad idea, like really check in. And if you're listening right now and you're hearing something in my voice or Angela's voice, like just check in. Like, is there room to hear your own voice?
Right.
Your own voice matters as much, if not a lot more, than anyone else's.
No, and I too was going through my own journey when my mom, who had borderline personality, passed away within a few months of my mother-in-law, and I was pregnant.
Oh my gosh.
And we moved. And I too, in the midst of that, had to keep listening and get in touch with, okay, all of this is going on, but what do I want? And it sounds counterintuitive, but absolutely starting a business and having something for yourself as a mother can completely be a form of self-care if you do it right.
That is true. There are pitfalls. There are ways
Yes.
to do it wrong.
Yes, but if you do it properly with the right guidance, it can absolutely be that thing that you've just been looking for to put yourself into to reclaim, you know, your power, your abilities and to share them and also show up as a parent the way you want to. I think that's the magical thing. Like you said, there are lots of pitfalls. But it can be that thing that you need it to be as a mom
A
and as an
100%.
individual with a bit, lots of talent. So I love that story. So much of it resonated with me, and I'm sure it will resonate with listeners. I can look back on how my traumatic childhood with a mother who struggled with mental illness fueled my entrepreneurial success. So, can you share maybe some of that? Because I think a lot of people can think, just like I did, that that's something that could potentially really hold you back, but it can
Yeah.
be your fuel.
Oh, yeah. I would say I needed to figure out what the silver lining was to being raised by a mom that was a single mom with manic depression and being raised in a 650 square foot apartment in New York and having my living room be half my bedroom and the rest was a living room. I needed to find a different way of almost writing my narrative, right, from childhood. And I actually did that when I wrote a short story in a book called Fast Fallen Women, which is a collection of short stories. And Amy Tan, actually, from the Joy Luck Club, also did a short story in that book. And I share the story of when my mom was pregnant with my sister and she went to a movie theater to see Last of the Mohegans. Now, the name of the movie has no major role in this whole story, except to say, in that episode, she was really thinking about her indigenous roots, my mom, that is.
Mhm.
And I had to, when I was about 14 at the time, I had to follow my mom and I had to follow her and not cause a scene in the street. I also had to figure out how I was going to get into that movie theater for free and explain to a bunch of strangers a pretty crisis sort of situation and not cause a stir. Those skills make talking to anyone that has been on my podcast, as an example, extraordinarily simple. If I've had to speak to adults when I was a child about something that felt extraordinarily risky, like I could be taken away from my mom if they find out that I'm being raised by someone that is in, an episode,
Mhm.
then inviting someone like Gary Vaynerchuk or Beth Comstock or Susie Batiste to my podcast is so easy. So, when I think about the skills that I learned as a child who had to grow up very quickly and had to be extra observant of her surroundings to watch out for, like, eruptions or chaotic or erratic situations. You're nodding your head. Angela's like, I know what you're saying.
Yep.
Then, right? Then, like, business, I'm not saying business is easy.
Mhm.
However, I would say that my barometer for I'm going to implode and scream right now is way higher than
Mhm.
if I didn't have those childhood experiences, because the reality is now we have extra resources and we're
Mhm.
not that little girl anymore,
Right.
and anyone that's listening, this is something that really, it hurts my heart, because I know a lot of people that, if you're a mom, you feel self-conscious, scared, and ashamed if you suffer from a mental illness, and you're
Mhm.
scared as heck that you're going to scar your child
Mhm.
because of what they're seeing and because of what you're not able to do for them. And I'm here to say, and I'm sure Angela, you're a testament too, like, there's things that a child can pick up that are wonderful, okay?
Mhm.
Wonderful and extraordinary from having a parent who might not have all of their capabilities, because it causes that child to pull something out from themselves
Mhm.
before the world would ask them to.
Mhm.
Like, if that's
Right.
resilience, and I
Right.
think it's applicable to
Mhm.
business beyond the
Right.
shadow of a doubt.
Yeah, and I bring this up because so many of the women that I talked to, and I myself included, was thought, oh, I was qualified to be an entrepreneur despite that.
Mm,
But no, we're qualified because we're moms and we've been through things and managed so many things in our life because of that. Not in spite of it, but because of it. And it makes us uniquely qualified. And we so often don't give ourselves credit for all the things that we have done and all the things that we have been through that have prepared us for this moment, you know, this conversation right here, you
yeah.
know. I mean, so I really like to take the opportunity to shine light on that because, so many women that I talk to don't have that realization. They just don't connect those dots. And I didn't for a long time.
Yeah, I mean, I had to write a whole book. I mean,
Yeah.
that was 2 years.
Right.
I was living in Australia, finished it here in Austin, Texas. So I can't say I woke up and I was like, oh, I'm so grateful for those childhood
Right.
chaotic
No, it is
moments.
definitely a process.
I journaled, I did my morning pages. I mean, therapy, you name it. I'm becoming a meditation practitioner. I'm still working on this, you
I
know?
love it. Yeah, I just became a Reiki practitioner. So I mean, yeah, it's like once you realize how to package it and heal, like all you want to do is help other people do the same because so much of it out there exists and so many people need the same help that you found for yourself. So I love that. Let's talk about your podcast. You have interviewed some amazing guests, like you mentioned Gary Vee. What are some of the things that you've learned from those conversations that can apply to our listeners?
Well, the number one thing that I've learned in terms of, like, I think at this point, maybe I would have like 270, 80 or more episodes,
Mhm.
is that people are wanting to be part of your success story
Mm.
more often than not. And when I've coached a lot of moms who launch a business, they have this idea that people don't want to be bothered by them.
Mhm.
or, who am I to talk to someone like Susie Batiste or, anybody that's been on my podcast. And I would say that, I don't know, maybe at the point of guest number 10 was Gary Vee, basically, when I realized that, oh, wait a minute, people are really interested in helping people who also want to help themselves.
Mm.
I think that makes a big difference because a lot of these individuals that have been on my podcast, the Mom Founder Imagination Hub, they get a lot of requests, right? So there's people who want something from them in every single direction. And, if I were to approach, for example, Jordan Harbinger, who was on my podcast, or Cal Fussman, or, one of my favorite, and it's so funny, but is like the New York Times bestselling children's book illustrator David Roberts from like the
Mhm.
Iggy Peck series,
Mhm.
and also like a Muppet. But anyways, I digress. That's my childhood side in me coming out. But these people, even though they're famous, even though they're, on TV,
Mhm.
even though they seem unapproachable, they're
Mhm.
quite approachable. And what I would want anyone that's listening right now to understand is that for me, my podcast, and I think it was a shift that happened along the way, but my podcast originally it came out of a dare. My husband, was listening to James Altucher interview Gary Vaynerchuk. This was in 2017 or 2016. And the dare was, oh, anyone that launches their own podcast, Gary Vee will be on your podcast. And so will James Altucher. Well, surprise, surprise, it wasn't that simple, right? So my husband tells me this. I was doing what I normally would do, which was cooking rice and beans on a stove for my family that night in Connecticut. And when I was cooking it, I had this feeling come over me, like when my husband presented this opportunity. I didn't have a podcast back then, by the way.
Mhm.
I didn't have a microphone. I didn't know how this thing worked. Point of the matter is, I felt something and I was inspired to act. And I decided at that time, okay, I'm going to do it. I'm going to do this dare. I'm going to do it. And I'm going to still be a mom. So I didn't like drop my kids off at grandparents for like 100 days, but it did take 100 days. So in the course of 100 days, I decided every day I would write about 1,000 words on medium.com. Medium.com is a platform that Gary Vaynerchuk was an investor in. So there was some strategy in terms of like
Mhm.
trying to get on his radar. And so every day, 1,000 words. So I would say about day 80 or so, I was like at a kid swimming pool lesson. I was there with my cell phone, as a lot of moms are, looking at your cell phone, kids are swimming in the lanes. And I was thinking to myself, they lied to me. They completely lied to me. They said that if someone asked them and launched a podcast, that they would be a guest, and they completely lied to me, and they haven't accepted it, and all is just wrong with the world. I got a phone call that moment. It was not Gary Vee, so like calm down, listeners. It is not Gary Vee just yet. No, but it was one of my former clients who actually knew that Gary Vee would be at a Foot Locker like event because of his sneakers at the time. And she told me, Melissa, this is your shot. So here I am in parallel doing all this writing, trying to get their attention. And this is how I got the Gary Vee interview.
Mhm.
And the nice part of it is that A, my writing skills got a lot better. So that's cool. But then I got a better story, right? Then I got a phone call from a client. But B, I was like, oh my God, I have 24 hours to now make this happen. And it's not like I had my childcare in place. It's not like I had anything else in place. It was like a moment where I had to use my, the logistical skills we have as moms, where
Mhm.
we just all of a sudden magic had it, and we're like, oh, I know how to get this person to like karate, and that other person to soccer, and this other person to Spanish lessons. Well, I used those skills, by the way, to orchestrate this grand scenario, and it worked out wonderfully. And I did the same thing for when I interviewed James Altucher. Same exact idea. He was very last minute. He's like, oh, you went to my comedy show, which I literally went to his comedy show. So that meant childcare. I needed childcare for that. But I went to his comedy show. I was the butt of his joke, by the way. And I went on Twitter at the time and I told him, I said, hey, you made fun of me. Now can I interview you? And he's like, oh my goodness, that was you. And I was like, yeah, it was me. And he gave me 24 hours to like get a production team. So what does any mom do? She gets a former military veteran client because, you know, military logistics, she was really great at that. And the former trombone dancer who was on America's Got Talent, because obviously he was a podcast guest because I talked to strangers on planes. And we showed up there and we went to his house and I interviewed him for that. I didn't even know how to plug in my microphone, by the way. Like I was like MacGyvering it for anyone that's listening that's of that era, you know, MacGyver, you know, like paper clips and such. Yeah, so I'm glad I got the audio, but yeah, it's like anyone that's listening, like you have skills that you use for your mom life that are totally transferable for your business life if that is your desire, you know. And on my podcast I interviewed you know, lots of business leaders who actually told me that they actually use their business skills to help with their family life.
Yep.
So I've learned so much from my guests, not just like how to pursue anyone at this point, but then on top of that, you know, I've learned how to be a better mom, a more, you know, a better question asker. I interviewed Cal Fussman. Like Larry King was his mentor. Like, do I need to say more? Like, it's like, so it's beautiful, the people that, you know, if you decide to like launch a business, grow your business, or expose yourself to new people, which is what I teach my clients to do, there's so much that you can learn. But what's more, your kids will then learn from you. Like my podcast is my treasure trove, it is my legacy, it is for my children, because if they got a business idea, then I've got a person who could help them execute it.
100%. All of those things have crossed my mind and come out of my mouth before. Absolutely. I mean, yeah, it is. Once you can move past all of the voices telling you that this isn't something you should be doing as a mom, and starting a business is going to somehow make you a worse mom, and not looking at it as, you know, an opportunity to grow on a level that you never expected. It truly is that makes you a better business owner and a better person, and therefore a better parent, and just setting the stage for our children, not just telling them what's possible, but actually doing it. It's so powerful. I love that story. Ah, man, we could talk forever, and I know we're coming up a little bit against time, but looking back on all that you have been through, what advice would you give to moms who are feeling overwhelmed in the process of starting and growing a business after all that you've been through, talking to guests, and your experience as an entrepreneur?
So for me, it's about finding the resources that already exist and that are under our noses. You know, the reality of the matter, when I was a child, I didn't have any resources. You know, like you're just learning how to like exist and you're just wondering if like the people on TV are like legitimately real or like what is that, right? Literally I had those thoughts and it wasn't like I was 5, I could have been about 15. But anyway, point of the matter is that, you know, the advice for overwhelm that I just gave on my podcast actually was this one. So if you're a mom and you have a child, for example, who is, let's just imagine under 18, you can actually play with your child during a moment of extreme overwhelm. You can always hug your child if you feel like you don't know what else to do. You can also, and I know that this is something that you hear it a lot, but we don't realize as moms, we have this as a competitive advantage. So they say, you know, when it comes to like a business challenge or a business offering, they say, explain it to me like if I were a 5-year-old. Well, guess what? we actually might have 5-year-olds in our home. So why not, engage your child in that sticky, hairy challenge that might feel overwhelming? I really believe that we have imagination experts in residence
Mhm.
for a reason. Like, we may have clocked in our 10,000 hours, like by the age of 12, when we were younger, but our kids are like in it. They're in it.
Mm.
They're in that moment of flow, of play, of levity, of joy. They know how to, like, bring to any situation lightness. And if you feel heaviness, if you feel overwhelmed, stuckness, or you're in a rut, at minimum, go to your child and, like, hug them. Like, just hug them,
Mhm.
play with them, talk to them. It's kind of like it zaps for me
Mhm.
overwhelm. And I know a lot of my clients too. So that, and that's important. I really want anyone that's listening to take this to heart, because
Mhm.
I know that there are a lot of voices besides us that you're listening to that might suggest that you need external stuff in order to resolve, the feelings of overwhelm or anxiety or anything that might be going on and might feel scary as a business
Mhm.
owner. But I want to say that at minimum, give yourself some credit. Like, you might have something that could really at least take you to the next hour,
Mhm.
at least take you to the next day. And yeah, every single day you have to, again, wake up making that choice every single day. I choose not to feel overwhelmed or to not let overwhelm bamboozle my dreams.
I love that you mentioned that because I have observed that a lot of adults find themselves in the position of trying to control that playfulness, that that levity, that brightness that children have, and kind of try to damper it to settle their own nervous system. And I love that you turn that around, and really we should be celebrating their joyfulness and their playfulness and learn from them, because that's the place of abundance. That's the place of manifesting all the things that we want to do. So I love that reminder. And, I think one of the most important things that you can do as an entrepreneur or a wantrepreneur is invest in yourself, build a community, find other like-minded people. And so, tell listeners where they can connect with you and where they can find what you're working on, if anything you mentioned resonated.
Absolutely. So, in terms of getting a free chapter of my book, just go to fertileideas.com. And you can also connect with me on Instagram at Melissa Llarena. I'm sure this will be in the show notes.
Yeah, yeah.
And of course, I'm super nerdy. So I've got to also say, I really love hanging out on LinkedIn. I know, don't judge me. But if you connect with me, any friends of Angela's is my friend. So I totally accept that connection there too. So that's another good spot to find me. And my podcast, Mom
Yeah,
Founder Imagination Hub,
I love
available
it.
everywhere that this podcast is available. So
Yeah, I
find
love
me
it. I'm
there.
gonna give it a deep dive. I love finding a new podcast that I can just kind of listen to in the car line and as school has gotten back into session. So I love that. Thank you, Melissa. My sister's name Melissa, so I love that name. So thank you so much for joining us today. I loved that you shared all of your wisdom and all of your insight and experience with us. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Angela. I appreciate this. Thank you again.
Yeah.